In the autumn of 1891, when a scarlet fever outbreak stole 52 souls from the remote township of Stillwater, Montana, a family of 4 sisters named Harrowgate exhibited an immunity that baffled the town's sole physician. Their survival, however, carried a price so monstrous that the 3 doctors subsequently called to consult refused to record their observations, and the Montana Territorial Medical Association quietly classified every document pertaining to the incident. What had first appeared to be heavenly favor swiftly curdled into something far more ominous. A metamorphosis so horrifying that the local Presbyterian congregation incinerated every reference to the Harrowgate name from their parish ledgers. The sisters developed manifestations no medical journal had ever catalogued. Symptoms that grew steadily less human with each passing week. By the first snowfall, townsfolk reported that the sisters no longer projected ordinary reflections. Their speech had acquired resonant, choral qualities that made listeners' ears ring with pain, and their eyes captured the light like those of creatures of the night. The final medical report, classified to this very day, was said to contain the phrase, "The subjects have surpassed all established human biological taxonomy prior to the permanent sequestration of all records." Tonight, after more than 130 years of silence, we are going to unearth the reason contemporary science continues to reject the events on that secluded ranch, and why the reality of the Harrowgate sisters may be more frightening than any spectral tale. Before we delve deeper into the account of Prudence, Constance, Mercy, and Felicity Harrowgate, I must pose a crucial question. This channel is not designed for all viewers, only for the most courageous spirits who dare to unearth the enigmas that others are too afraid to voice. If you count yourself among these genuine seekers of the unknown, click that subscribe button and inform me in the comments which region or city you are joining us from. Do you possess the fortitude to discover the true events that unfolded when belief and science crashed together on the Montana frontier? Now, let us journey back to 1891, a time when devotion and dread were intertwined. The tiny mining settlement of Iron Creek, Montana, was little more than a junction between silver claims and timber stands in the closing decade of the 19th century. With scarcely 250 souls dispersed across the rugged valley, it was the sort of place where everyone was privy to their neighbors' affairs, where a handshake was as binding as any contract, and where Sunday service at the Presbyterian Church functioned as both spiritual instruction and communal event. The brutal winters that delivered snows capable of entombing entire cabins, and the parching summers that could wither crops in a matter of days, had molded a populace of resilient, devout individuals who interpreted adversity as a test from God, and good fortune as a celestial reward. The very terrain appeared to foster such beliefs. Leagues of pine forest stretched toward every horizon, interrupted only by the occasional homestead, water pump, or cluster of aspen trees indicating a stream. The heavens commanded all, immense, boundless, and perpetually shifting. During electrical storms, lightning would perform across the mountains for hours, bathing the wilderness in sudden, brilliant flares that exposed the profound seclusion of each dwelling. In winter, the wind screamed through the passes with a tone that sounded nearly sentient, bearing ice and cold that could kill a man in minutes if he lost his path between his shed and his door. The Harrowgate sisters had come to Iron Creek in the spring of 1885, acquiring 600 acres of fertile valley land with funds inherited from their mother's estate in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. The sisters had liquidated all their possessions, loaded their worldly goods into 3 freight wagons, and journeyed westward with the resolve of individuals pursuing a holy summons. Prudence Harrowgate, the eldest at 35 upon their arrival, possessed the innate command of a woman familiar with leadership and duty. Standing 5 feet 10 with sturdy shoulders forged by years of homestead labor, she carried herself with a quiet stateliness that earned respect without requesting it. Her work-roughened hands, marked by innumerable hours of toil, could soothe a frightened colt or guide a plow with equivalent expertise. But it was her gaze that people recalled most vividly, a steely gray like granite. They seemed to peer directly through a person to something more profound. Those who conversed with Prudence frequently departed feeling she had gazed straight into their spirit and found them deficient. Constance, 2 years Prudence's junior, acted as the family's pragmatic intellect and financial steward. Where Prudence led through moral conviction, Constance administered via meticulous strategy and arithmetical exactness. She could compute timber yields, or prices, and seasonal trends with a precision that impressed even the most seasoned prospectors in the territory. Her account books, maintained in fastidious script, logged every cent earned and spent, every cord harvested, every ounce of silver extracted or traded. Yet beneath her practical facade smoldered the same fierce piety that inspired all the sisters. Constance perceived God's design in all things, in the perfect angles of a timber line, in the exact scheduling of a snowfall, in the mathematical order that ruled the natural world. Mercy, the third sister at 30, had received the most formal schooling of the 4. She had studied at Harrisburg Female Seminary for 2 years before their mother's passing summoned her back to the family home. In that time, she had learned not only divinity, but also anatomy, philosophy, and natural history. Her private collection, painstakingly transported to Montana in a custom-built chest, held over 180 volumes encompassing topics from scriptural analysis to human physiology. Mercy's chamber in the homestead resembled an academic's library more than a settler's quarters, with books piled on every conceivable surface and papers covered in her precise notations filling wooden crates under her cot. Felicity, the youngest at 24, burned with a religious passion that occasionally alarmed even her devout siblings. Where the elder sisters approached their devotion with scholarly gravity or practical implementation, Felicity's faith was pure feeling in total submission. She dedicated hours each day to prayer, often crying with the ferocity of her communication with the divine. She fasted routinely, occasionally passing days without sustenance, while maintaining that prayer and holy text supplied all the nourishment she required. Her fellow congregants back in Pennsylvania had described her as anointed by the Spirit. But some had murmured that her dedication verged on perilous fixation. Unlike their neighbors who attended the Presbyterian church in town, a simple clapboard structure with a spire visible for miles across the valley, the Harrowgate sisters had erected their own meeting house on a bluff overlooking their land. The construction had consumed the majority of their initial year in Montana. They had quarried slate from an outcrop on their property, felled pine logs from a stand near the border, and fashioned each component of the edifice with their own hands. The meeting house they built mirrored their severe yet profoundly held beliefs. The building measured 28 by 18 feet with walls of exactly fitted slate and a roof of hand-hewn pine shakes. Inside, they had carved benches from local cedar, each one impeccably smooth and fashioned with careful joinery that spoke of countless hours of patient artistry. The pulpit, also handcrafted, bore etchings in Greek that Mercy had transcribed from her biblical sources. Tall windows on the northern and southern walls captured the midday and twilight sun, flooding the space with amber illumination during their matins and vespers. The sisters conducted their own services every Sunday at dawn and dusk, adhering to what they termed primitive Presbyterian tenets, a stricter interpretation of Calvinist doctrine that stressed personal epiphany, direct dialogue with the divine, and the priesthood of every believer. Their worship included extended periods of quiet contemplation, comprehensive scriptural examination, and what they named testimony of the soul, where each sister would share any holy revelations or understandings she had received during the week. Their daily regimen reflected their dedication to both faith and work. They awoke each day at 4:30 for an hour of silent prayer in the meeting house, observing the sun climb over the eastern peaks while they communed privately with God. Following a modest breakfast of porridge, buttermilk, and whatever berries were in season, they would devote the morning to working their land. The afternoon hours were dedicated to livestock care, tool maintenance, and the innumerable chores needed to maintain a homestead. But evening was always reserved for spiritual pursuits, Bible study, doctrinal debate, and collective prayer that frequently continued until long after dark. The sisters lived as spinsters, consecrating themselves wholly to their faith and their property, though this choice had not been without consequence. Their log home, a solid 1.5-story building they had constructed during their second year in Montana, mirrored their utilitarian outlook on life and their profound religious commitment. The walls displayed scriptural passages carved into wooden tablets, each one chosen for its relevance to daily homestead life and spiritual development. Every room contained at minimum one well-used Bible, and several held supplementary religious texts that Mercy had deemed worthy of regular scrutiny. By the autumn of 1891, the Harrowgate homestead had become a paragon of agricultural prosperity and pious dedication. Their vegetable gardens flourished across the valley. Their sheep grazed peacefully on lush pastureland, their root cellar was stocked with preserves, and their meeting house stood as a monument to their unshakable faith. The sisters had accomplished all they had envisioned when they departed Pennsylvania 6 years prior: prosperity, self-reliance, and the liberty to worship according to their most profound beliefs. Their neighbors in Iron Creek respected the Harrowgate sisters, though many found their intensity disquieting and their separation from community life perplexing. The sisters were known for their integrity in commercial transactions, their readiness to aid neighbors in times of need, and their reputation for diligence and equitable treatment of the occasional laborers they hired during harvest. But they were also known for their reluctance to join social functions, their refusal to engage in idle chatter, and their practice of assessing everyone they encountered with those piercing gray eyes that seemed to see directly through to a person's essence. When the sisters came to town for provisions, which they did every 3 weeks with regimental exactness, they moved with quiet intent and spoke only when essential. They would arrive at the trading post with a meticulously prepared list, conduct their business with courteous efficiency, and depart without participating in the social niceties other homesteaders relished. Children often gaped in wonder at the 4 matching chestnut braids, perfectly coiled, that gave the sisters an almost apostolic aspect. The initial instance of scarlet fever emerged in Iron Creek on September 8, 1891, attacking with the abrupt ferocity that defined the most potent strains of the sickness. Mr. Arthur Lowell, who managed the trading post with his wife, Eleanor, had seemed in perfect health when he opened the establishment that morning, welcoming patrons with his customary jovial disposition and conversing about the encouraging outlook for the silver yield. But by midday he was consumed by fever, his skin marked with the distinctive red rash that seasoned doctors identified as the stamp of scarlet fever. Dr. Michael Stirling, the territory's sole physician, had been summoned from his rounds at the McDonald claim, where he had been setting a compound fracture that had taken the bulk of the day. He arrived at the Lowell store to find Arthur incoherent with fever, his temperature so elevated it scarcely registered on his medical thermometer. His wife Eleanor, a typically composed and sensible woman, was pacing the store like a trapped beast, wringing her hands and imploring Dr. Stirling to act, to do anything, to preserve her husband of 25 years. "Doctor, he was fine this morning," Eleanor kept repeating, her voice breaking with despair. "Fine as he's ever been. Served breakfast to the McDonald lads when they came for supplies. Chuckled at something young Liam said about his new pup. How does a person go from hail to this in a handful of hours?" Dr. Stirling had encountered scarlet fever before during his medical education in Boston, but nothing quite like this. The malady typically developed over days, granting physicians time to attempt remedies and families time to brace for the probable result. But Arthur Lowell's case appeared to have compressed the entire progression of the sickness into one cataclysmic day. His fever was higher than Stirling had ever documented in a living patient. His delirium was total and fierce, and the crimson rash covered not merely his torso, but his whole body in configurations that seemed almost intentional in their symmetry. Despite Dr. Stirling's utmost efforts, cool cloths, laudanum for the agony, and vigilant tracking of his vital signs, Arthur Lowell died just before daybreak on September 9. Yet even in death, his case remained deeply troubling. The stiffness of his corpse set in far too swiftly. His skin adopted a waxy pallor that implied preservation rather than normal decay, and his eyes, which Dr. Stirling had shut according to proper protocol, kept reopening regardless of how frequently he pressed the lids closed. Within a day of Arthur's death, 3 additional cases appeared in Iron Creek. The sufferers appeared to share no commonality except their consumption of water from the settlement's primary well, a source that had delivered clean, fresh water for the community since its establishment. But when Dr. Stirling inspected the well, he discovered proof of tainting from seepage that had somehow penetrated the meticulously built stone casing. The second casualty was elderly Seamus O'Malley, an Irish immigrant who had worked the same mining claim for a dozen years. Seamus's case followed the same ruinous pattern as Arthur's. Robust health in the morning, blazing fever by afternoon, and death before first light. But Seamus's final hours were marked by something Dr. Stirling had never witnessed. The old miner spoke in tongues no one in the community recognized, employing words and expressions that sounded archaic and somehow menacing. The third and fourth victims were the Miller twins, Grace and Rose, 2 15-year-old girls who had been among the most gifted pupils in the territory's lone schoolhouse. Their deaths were especially tragic because they happened in unison, as if the sickness had synchronized its assault to claim both girls at the precise same instant. Their father, Robert Miller, later informed Dr. Stirling that in their ultimate delirium, the twins had spoken in flawless harmony, reciting what sounded like psalms in a language reminiscent of Greek, but containing phonetics that human vocal cords should not have been capable of generating. By September 22, 16 people had perished from the peculiar scarlet fever strain, and Dr. Stirling had recorded manifestations and progressions that defied every tenet of medical science he had studied. The victims all died within a day of displaying symptoms. Their fevers reached temperatures that should have killed them in minutes, and their final hours were characterized by delirium that seemed more like possession than medical emergency. The terror that seized Iron Creek during those dreadful weeks in late September and early October was unlike anything the community had ever endured. Families barricaded themselves inside their cabins, refusing to venture out save for the most critical tasks. The trading post, now operated by Eleanor Lowell with her nephew's assistance, became a place of hushed discussions and furtive looks. The Presbyterian Church, which had always functioned as the community's meeting place and wellspring of solace, stood nearly vacant during Sunday services, as people dreaded that any assembly might offer the sickness new targets. Dr. Stirling had commanded the tainted well be sealed and advised all inhabitants to boil their water. But the sickness persisted in spreading with a configuration that hinted at something beyond simple contamination. The victims appeared to be selected based on some rationale that had no connection to their exposure to the well or their proximity to prior cases. Some families lost every member while adjacent households stayed entirely healthy. It was against this backdrop of horror and bewilderment that the Harrowgate sisters made their pivotal choice to involve themselves in the calamity. The sisters had remained secluded on their homestead during the initial weeks of the outbreak, following their customary practice of evading non-essential contact with the town and its inhabitants. But on October 2, Mercy announced to her sisters that she had received what she believed was a divine revelation summoning them to action. "I have prayed for direction," Mercy told her sisters as they assembled for their evening meal. "And the Lord has shown me that this plague is a trial not merely of the community's belief, but of our own merit to serve as His instruments. We have been shielded from the sickness not for our own protection, but so that we might manifest the power of genuine faith when confronted with the ultimate test. The decision, once made, was executed with the same methodical precision that characterized everything the sisters did. On October 3, Mercy traveled to town to offer their aid to Dr. Stirling and to volunteer their services in tending to the ill. But her true purpose, which she disclosed only to her sisters, was to place herself in direct contact with the sickness, to challenge it, to test her faith and demonstrate her worthiness as an instrument of divine intention. Mercy's first stop was the home of John Fletcher, the local carpenter, whose 6-year-old daughter, Beatrice, had fallen sick the previous evening. The girl was burning with fever, her small form convulsing with seizures her parents were helpless to halt. When Mercy arrived, she found the Fletcher family gathered around Beatrice's bed, praying fervently for heavenly intervention. What transpired next would be recalled differently by all who saw it, but everyone concurred that Mercy's actions were both profoundly stirring and somehow disquieting. The youngest Harrowgate sister knelt beside Beatrice's bed and laid her hands on the girl's fevered brow. But instead of uttering a conventional prayer for the child's recovery, Mercy spoke words that would haunt all present. "Lord God," Mercy prayed, her voice carrying across the small bedroom with unusual resonance. "If this child must endure suffering for purposes known only to your divine wisdom, then let that agony pass through me and my sisters. Let us bear what she cannot bear, experience what she should not experience, and become whatever we must become to serve your mysterious designs. Take this innocent life and spare it through our willing sacrifice." As Mercy spoke, her hands seemed to grow warm against Beatrice's forehead, and the girl's convulsions gradually ceased. The fever that had been devouring the child's small form began to break, and for the first time in hours, Beatrice Fletcher opened her eyes and spoke in her normal voice, requesting water and complaining of hunger. The transformation was so striking and immediate that John Fletcher dropped to his knees, praising God for the miracle that had rescued his daughter. But those who observed Mercy during those crucial minutes detected changes that were far more subtle, yet somehow more alarming than Beatrice's recovery. As the girl's fever broke, Mercy's own skin had taken on a flush that implied her body temperature was rising. Her eyes, normally the same steely gray that characterized all the Harrowgate sisters, began to show flecks of silver that seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury. When Mercy finally rose from Beatrice's bedside, she moved with the cautious precision of someone fighting to maintain command over her own form. Dr. Stirling, who had been summoned to witness what the Fletchers were calling a miracle, examined both Beatrice and Mercy with mounting confusion and apprehension. The girl displayed no trace of scarlet fever, but Mercy exhibited early symptoms that were already advancing far more rapidly than should have been medically feasible. Over the next 2 days, Mercy visited every household that had been touched by the epidemic, offering prayers and spiritual solace to the grieving families. At each stop, she repeated the same rite, placing her hands on the heads of the sick and praying for their suffering to be transferred to herself and her sisters. The outcomes were remarkable and terrifying in equal measure. In household after household, fever-ridden victims underwent sudden and total recoveries. But with each healing, Mercy's own state deteriorated more swiftly. By October 5, when she finally returned to the Harrowgate homestead, Mercy was burning with fever and displaying manifestations no medical textbook had ever described. But the most disquieting aspect was her continued insistence that everything was unfolding according to divine plan. Even as her fever climbed to temperatures that should have killed her, she spoke with perfect clarity about the sacred nature of her metamorphosis. "This is not illness," she told her increasingly worried sisters. "This is refinement. The Lord is incinerating everything in me that is merely human so that what remains will be worthy of the eternal labor He has planned for us." Within hours, all 4 Harrowgate sisters had begun exhibiting the same manifestations that had transformed Mercy. But their collective metamorphosis would prove to be even more disturbing than anyone could have envisioned. Dr. Stirling's initial examination of the Harrowgate sisters on October 10, 1891, would become the most significant and troubling case of his medical career. The October chill was biting as Dr. Stirling guided his horse cart up the winding gravel path that led to the Harrowgate homestead. The pine boughs on either side of the trail were heavy with frost, and the air was sharp with cold that made the distant cabin seem to waver like an apparition. But as he neared the property, Stirling noted details that struck him as strangely incongruous. The sisters' vegetable gardens, which should have been wilting from the frost like every other plot in the territory, stood vibrant and green as if they had been enjoying temperate weather. The sheep in the pastures appeared hale and well-fed, despite the fact that grazing had become challenging throughout the region. When Stirling knocked on the cabin door, it was opened by Prudence. But the eldest sister's appearance instantly struck the doctor as profoundly aberrant. Prudence's skin had taken on a diaphanous quality that revealed the web of veins beneath. But the blood that moved through those vessels was not the normal crimson of human circulation. Instead, it possessed a silver luminescence that seemed to pulse with its own internal rhythm. "Dr. Stirling," Prudence said, and her voice carried the authority Stirling remembered, but it was amplified and enriched with harmonic overtones that made every word seem to vibrate directly in the listener's ribcage. "We have been anticipating you. Our transformation is almost complete, and we require your witness to ensure that others will comprehend what has transpired here." Stirling found the four sisters arranged in the main room of the cabin. Their bodies positioned with mathematical exactness that suggested deliberate arrangement rather than random placement. They were alive. Their chests rose and fell with breathing. Their eyes tracked Stirling's movement, but they had been transformed in ways that challenged his comprehension of human physiology. "Their vital signs are impossible," Stirling wrote in his private journal that night. Prudence's temperature registered 107.2 degrees, yet she sits upright and speaks with perfect lucidity. Constance's pulse is so slow I can barely detect it, yet she moves with normal energy. Mercy's breathing has altered, she seems to inhale and exhale only once every few minutes, but shows no indications of oxygen deprivation. And Felicity's skin temperature is actually lower than normal despite her obvious fever symptoms. Constance, positioned to Prudence's right, had undergone changes that were equally dramatic but distinct in their specific manifestation. The characteristic red rash of scarlet fever covered her entire body. But instead of the random configuration typical of the sickness, they had organized themselves into intricate geometric designs that resembled mathematical formulae inscribed in flesh and blood. As Stirling watched in fascination and horror, the pattern slowly shifted and altered as if Constance's skin had become a living slate. "The calculations are becoming clear," Constance said, her voice joining Prudence's in perfect harmony despite the fact that they were speaking simultaneously. "The relationship between substance and spirit, between duration and perpetuity, between human limitation and divine potential. We are becoming the proof of theorems that human mathematics has only begun to glimpse." Mercy's transformation had progressed along lines that reflected her scholarly nature and deep theological knowledge. Her body remained recognizably human in its basic structure, but her skin had taken on the appearance of ancient vellum covered with script in alphabets that Stirling recognized as Greek, Aramaic, and Hebrew, along with other symbols that seemed to shift and change even as he watched. When Mercy spoke, her words came in a voice that no longer sounded entirely human. The sound seemed to originate from multiple points around the room concurrently, creating an effect that made Stirling feel as if he were being addressed by a choir of invisible speakers. "Doctor," she said, "we have uncovered truths that your medical science cannot accommodate. We are chronicling these revelations so that future generations might comprehend the process of divine transformation." Felicity, the youngest sister, had undergone the most visually striking transformation of all. Her entire body radiated a soft phosphorescent glow that provided illumination for the room's interior. The light was not harsh or disagreeable, but it was profoundly unnatural, a cool blue-white radiance that seemed to come from within her very bones. Her eyes had become completely luminous, lacking pupils or irises, appearing instead as twin moons set in a human face. "We no longer require food as sustenance," Felicity said, her words somehow reaching Stirling's ears from both inside the room and from what seemed like a great distance. "We draw our energy directly from sources that human science has not yet discovered. We are becoming something new, something that exists between the mortal and eternal realms." Stirling's attempts to document his findings were met with resistance from the sisters themselves. They claimed that their state was a divine gift, a sign that God had selected them for a special purpose. They spoke of being purified by sacred fire and transformed into vessels worthy of the Lord's labor. But Dr. Stirling's medical training told him something far different. The sisters' manifestations resembled no known sickness, and their collective metamorphosis suggested either collective hysteria or something more sinister. He began to suspect that they had been exposed to some unknown toxin, possibly from their well or from tainted preserves in their cellar. The community's reaction to the sisters' state was mixed and increasingly tense. Some residents, led by Pastor Elias Ward of the Presbyterian Church, viewed their survival as miraculous. Others, particularly those who had lost family members to the epidemic, found the sisters' transformation disturbing and unnatural. "It ain't right," muttered Jacob Schmidt, who had buried his wife and 3 children in the span of a week. "Why should they be spared when good Christian folk are dying? And look at them. That ain't no blessing I can see. There's something wrong with those women. Something that makes my flesh crawl just looking at them." The sisters' conduct during this period only intensified the community's unease. They continued to work their land despite their state, moving with an eerie coordination that suggested they were communicating without words. Neighbors reported seeing them standing motionless in their gardens for hours at a time, their faces turned toward the sky as if listening to some inaudible voice. The alterations in their meeting house services became particularly unsettling. The sisters had always conducted their worship privately, but now their voices could be heard across the valley during their evening prayers. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, yet profoundly wrong, for voices harmonizing in ways that human vocal cords should not have been able to generate. Mrs. Abigail Miller, who lived on the adjacent claim, later told Dr. Stirling that she had approached the meeting house one evening to investigate the strange music. "I got within 40 yards of that building," she said, "and I swear on my father's grave that I could feel something pushing me back. Not physically, you understand, but something inside my skull telling me to turn around and leave. Those women are changed, doctor. Changed in ways that ain't natural." As October turned to November, the scarlet fever epidemic began to wane in Iron Creek. The tainted well had been sealed, new water sources established, and the surviving residents gradually returned to their normal routines. But the enigma of the Harrowgate sisters deepened with each passing day. Dar. Stirling made weekly visits to the homestead, ostensibly to monitor the sisters' state, but actually to document the progression of their metamorphosis. What he observed challenged his understanding of human physiology and left him questioning his own sanity. Prudence's internal temperature had stabilized at 106.9 degrees Fahrenheit. Yet she showed no indications of brain damage or organ failure. Her eyes had developed a silver hue that seemed to shift and swirl like liquid metal. When she spoke, her words carried a weight and authority that made listeners feel compelled to agree with her, even when she said things that defied logic. "Dr. Stirling," Prudence said during one examination, "you are attempting to measure us using instruments designed for ordinary human physiology. We have moved beyond the limitations that such tools were created to assess. Our bodies now function according to principles that your medical science has not yet discovered. Constance's red rash had continued to evolve, forming increasingly complex patterns that resembled ancient scripts. Dr. Stirling consulted several scholars by correspondence, sending careful drawings of the markings, but none could identify the symbols. More disturbing still, the patterns seemed to move slowly across Constance's skin, rearranging themselves into new configurations every few days. When Stirling attempted to take a blood sample from Constance's arm, he discovered that the sister's blood had been transformed into something that barely resembled normal human circulation. The substance that flowed from the small puncture wound was thicker than blood, silver in color, and seemed to move with deliberate purpose rather than responding to gravity and pressure. "Our circulation has been redesigned," Constance explained, watching Stirling's growing confusion with what might have been amusement. "The fluid that sustains us now carries not just oxygen and nutrients, but information and energy from sources that transcend physical matter." Mercy's voice had become completely inhuman. When she spoke, the sound came from everywhere and nowhere at once, as if the very air around her was vibrating with her words. Dr. Stirling noted that conversations with Mercy left him feeling dizzy and disoriented, and he began to suspect that the sister's speech was somehow affecting his brain chemistry. The texts that covered Mercy's skin were not static decorations, but were actively being written by some invisible force. As Stirling watched, new words appeared along Mercy's arms and chest, forming sentences and paragraphs in real time. The content seemed to be a running commentary on Stirling's examination, describing his thoughts and reactions with accuracy that suggested the sister could read his mind. "We are becoming books," Mercy said, her multidirectional voice making Stirling's head spin with vertigo. "Living repositories of knowledge that spans both human learning and divine revelation. The transformation is encoding information directly into our physical substance." Felicity's phosphorescence had grown stronger, allowing her to illuminate entire rooms with the pale glow emanating from her skin. But more unsettling was her apparent ability to sense things that should have been beyond human perception. She could predict weather changes days in advance, locate lost objects without searching, and seemed to know when visitors were approaching the homestead long before they became visible. During one examination, Felicity demonstrated an ability to perceive things that should have been beyond human sensation. She correctly identified the contents of Stirling's medical bag without looking inside it, described in detail the condition of horses stabled a mile away, and seemed to be aware of conversations taking place in the town of Iron Creek, 2 miles distant. "Our senses have been opened to perceive realities that normal humans cannot detect," Felicity explained, her luminous eyes somehow managing to convey warmth despite their otherworldly appearance. "We can see across distances that should be impossible. Hear sounds that carry on frequencies beyond normal hearing." The sisters' collective behavior had also changed in ways that suggested they were becoming something more than human. They moved with perfect synchronization, finishing each other's sentences and responding to unspoken communications. Their need for food and sleep had diminished dramatically. Dr. Stirling observed that they consumed perhaps half the calories of normal women and seemed to require only 2 or 3 hours of rest each night. Most disturbing of all was their claim that they were receiving divine revelations. The sisters spoke of visions showing them the future of their community, prophecies about coming disasters, and instructions for preparing their neighbors for some unnamed catastrophe. They began writing these revelations in a leather-bound journal using a script that resembled no known language. The community's initial curiosity about the sisters' state gradually gave way to fear and suspicion. Children were forbidden from playing near the Harrowgate property, and adults made warning signs when they saw the sisters in town. The Presbyterian Church, which had initially celebrated their survival as a miracle, began to distance itself from the family. Pastor Ward, who had once praised the sisters' faith, now spoke of them with barely concealed unease. "I fear," he confided to Dr. Stirling, "that in their zeal to serve the Lord, they may have opened themselves to influences that are not entirely heavenly. There is something in their eyes now, something that looks back at you with knowledge that no mortal woman should possess." By December 1891, the situation at the Harrowgate homestead had become untenable. The sisters' transformation had progressed to the point where they could no longer be considered entirely human. Yet, they remained lucid and articulate about their state. They spoke of being purified vessels chosen by God to serve as intermediaries between the divine and mortal realms. Dr. Stirling's documentation of their state had become increasingly frantic. His journal entries revealed a man struggling to maintain his scientific rationalism in the face of phenomena that defied explanation. He had begun corresponding with medical colleagues in Helena and Denver, seeking advice on the case, but their responses only deepened his frustration. "No physician I've consulted has ever encountered anything resembling the Harrowgate sisters' state," he wrote. "Their symptoms are physiologically impossible. Yet I observe them with my own eyes. I begin to wonder if I am losing my mind or if there are aspects of human biology that our medical science has yet to discover." The breaking point came on December 8 when young Lily Croft, the daughter of a local miner, vanished while playing near the Harrowgate property. Her parents found her 2 hours later sitting in the sisters' meeting house with a serene expression on her face. She claimed that the sisters had told her wonderful secrets about heaven and had shown her visions of angels. But when Dr. Stirling examined the child, he found that her temperature had risen to 103.5 degrees and her eyes had begun to take on the same silver hue that characterized Prudence's state. The girl's parents, terrified that their daughter had been infected with whatever had changed the sisters, demanded that Dr. Stirling intervene. "You have to stop this," Lily's father, George Croft, pleaded. "Those women, or whatever they've become, they're spreading their curse to our children. My little girl keeps talking about joining them in their holy work. She says they've shown her things that no 8-year-old should know about." Dr. Stirling's examination of Lily revealed that she had indeed been affected by her contact with the sisters. Her fever was unlike scarlet fever or any other sickness he recognized, and her behavior had changed dramatically. She spoke with wisdom beyond her years, demonstrated knowledge of medical and theological concepts she couldn't possibly have learned, and seemed to glow with the same phosphorescence that characterized Felicity. Faced with the possibility that the sister's state might be contagious, Dr. Stirling made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He contacted the Montana Territorial Medical Association and the Regional Health Authority requesting immediate intervention. But when officials arrived to investigate, they found the case so disturbing that they chose to suppress it rather than study it. Dr. Alastair Finch, the Territorial Medical Examiner, spent 4 days at the Harrowgate homestead in mid-December. His official report, sealed by the Territorial Board, allegedly contained observations that were incompatible with current medical understanding and potentially damaging to public health and safety. The report was classified and remains sealed to this day. But Finch's private letters to his sister, discovered years later, revealed the true extent of his horror. "I have seen things," he wrote, "that challenge not only our understanding of sickness and human physiology, but the very nature of life itself. The Harrowgate sisters are no longer entirely human, yet they are not dead. They exist in some intermediate state that our science cannot explain and dare not acknowledge." The community's growing unease about the sisters' continued presence came to a head when several families reported that their children had begun disappearing from their beds at night, only to be found hours later, standing in the fields surrounding the Harrowgate meeting house. The children had no memory of how they had gotten there, but they returned with knowledge and abilities that their parents found deeply disturbing. Just when we believed we'd witnessed everything, the horror in Iron Creek escalates. If this account is giving you shivers, share this video with a companion who adores dark mysteries. Click that like button to bolster our content, and remember to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's uncover together what occurs next. Mayor Jonathan Briggs convened a town meeting on December 18 to address what many residents viewed as a crisis requiring immediate intervention. The meeting was attended by nearly every adult in Iron Creek, and the discussions revealed a community deeply divided between those who viewed the sisters as blessed healers and those who saw them as dangerous influences. Dr. Stirling was called upon to provide a medical assessment, but his testimony only deepened the community's confusion and fear. He described the sisters' state as unlike anything in medical literature, acknowledged that their influence appeared to be spreading to other residents, and admitted that conventional medicine had no treatment to offer. "I have observed physiological changes in the Harrowgate sisters that challenge our fundamental understanding of human biology," Stirling told the assembled crowd. "Their vital signs are consistently abnormal, yet they show no signs of illness. Their capabilities exceed normal human limitations, yet they maintain lucid consciousness. I cannot classify their state as a sickness because they are not suffering. I cannot call it an improvement because it represents a fundamental alteration of human nature." The meeting concluded with a decision that would have profound consequences. A committee of community leaders was formed to visit the Harrowgate homestead and demand that the sisters either reverse the changes they had undergone or leave Iron Creek permanently. The committee would include Mayor Briggs, Pastor Ward, George Croft, and Dr. Stirling, and they would deliver an ultimatum requiring the sisters to respond within 1 week. The delegation from Iron Creek arrived at the Harrowgate homestead on December 25, 1891, under a leaden sky that seemed to press down upon the valley with the weight of impending snow. Dr. Stirling rode alongside Mayor Briggs, Pastor Ward, and George Croft, each man lost in his own thoughts about the confrontation that awaited them. The cabin and outbuildings appeared normal from a distance, but as the delegation drew closer, details emerged that confirmed Stirling's growing conviction that the Harrowgate property had become something beyond conventional classification. The vegetable gardens, which should have been frosted over weeks earlier, stood vibrant and green despite the approaching deep winter. The sheep in the pastures moved with an unnatural coordination, grazing in precise patterns that formed geometric shapes when viewed from above. The meeting house on the bluff seemed to shimmer in the gray light, its slate walls reflecting the sky in ways that stone should not have been capable of. Prudence Harrowgate met them at the cabin door, her silver-flecked eyes seeming to assess each man in turn. She stood taller than Stirling remembered, her posture unnaturally straight, her movements fluid and economical. When she spoke, her voice carried the harmonic resonance that had become characteristic of the sisters' speech. "We have been expecting you," she said, her words seeming to vibrate in the air around them. "The time has come for us to share our final revelation with the community." The delegation followed Prudence into the main room of the cabin, where the other 3 sisters waited in positions that formed a perfect square. Constance stood to Prudence's right, her arms covered in the intricate geometric patterns that had continued to evolve since Stirling's last visit. Mercy stood to Prudence's left, her skin covered in shifting texts that seemed to be actively writing themselves as the men watched. Felicity completed the square, her body emitting the soft phosphorescent glow that had grown stronger with each passing week. Mayor Briggs began the confrontation with the authority of his office, but his voice faltered as he spoke the words the committee had prepared. "The people of Iron Creek have asked us to come here today," he said, "to request that you either reverse the changes that have come over you or leave our community. Your presence has become a source of division and fear among our citizens. Children have been affected by contact with you, and we cannot allow this situation to continue. Prudence's response was delivered with a calm certainty that seemed to fill the room. "We understand your fear," she said, "but what you perceive as a threat is actually a gift. We have been chosen to demonstrate the next stage of human development." The scarlet fever was not a sickness but a refining fire, burning away our human limitations to reveal our true potential. We cannot reverse this process because it represents progress, not illness. And we will not leave because this land has been consecrated for the work we have been called to perform. Pastor Ward stepped forward, his Bible held before him like a shield. "Prudence," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "if this is truly a work of God, then demonstrate it through Scripture. Show us where in the Holy Word such transformations are described as blessings." Mercy answered before Prudence could speak, her multidirectional voice making the pastor flinch. "The Scriptures contain only the beginning of wisdom, Pastor," she said. "What we have become represents knowledge that was reserved for future generations. We are living proof that God's work did not end with the closing of the biblical canon. The divine continues to act in the world, and we are its current instruments." George Croft, his face tight with anger and fear, pointed a trembling finger at the sisters. "You infected my daughter," he accused. "Lily hasn't been the same since she visited your meeting house. She knows things no child should know. She speaks in languages she's never learned. You've stolen her childhood and turned her into something like you." Felicity's response was gentle but firm, her luminous eyes seeming to soften with compassion. "George," she said, "your daughter has been blessed with glimpses of realities that most humans never perceive. She is not sick or corrupted. She is awakening to her true potential, just as we have." Dr. Stirling, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke the words that had been forming in his mind for weeks. "Ladies," he said, "whatever you have become, you are no longer entirely human. Your physiology has been altered in ways that defy medical science. Your influence appears to be spreading to others in the community. As a physician, I cannot allow this to continue without intervention. If you will not seek treatment or leave voluntarily, then I must recommend to the territorial authorities that you be removed by force for the protection of public health." The four sisters exchanged a look that seemed to contain entire conversations. Then Prudence spoke the words that would end the confrontation and seal the fate of the Harrowgate family. "Dr. Stirling," she said, "you are attempting to apply human laws to a situation that has moved beyond human jurisdiction. We answer to a higher authority now. And that authority has given us a final revelation to share with you today." As the sisters began to speak in unison, their four voices blending into a single harmonic resonance that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the men listening, the room around them began to change. The walls seemed to become transparent, revealing not the Montana landscape outside, but a vision of swirling colors and shifting geometries that defied normal perception. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something ancient and powerful. The delegation from Iron Creek watched in horror as the sisters' bodies began to glow with increasing intensity, their forms becoming less distinct, more luminous, until they were no longer four separate women but a single being of light and sound. "We are the bridge," the unified voice declared, the words resonating not in the air but directly in the minds of the four men. "The connection between what humanity has been and what it must become. The refining fire that began with us will spread to all who are prepared to receive it. This is not the end but the beginning." Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the vision ended. The room returned to normal. The sisters stood before them once again as four distinct individuals. But something fundamental had changed in their appearance. Their human qualities had receded further, replaced by features that were increasingly alien and incomprehensible. The delegation fled the Harrowgate homestead that day, their minds reeling with what they had witnessed. They returned to Iron Creek with a story so incredible that few believed them. But the changes that followed could not be denied. In the weeks that followed the confrontation, the Harrowgate sisters withdrew completely from community life. They no longer came to town for supplies, no longer tended their gardens or livestock, no longer conducted their meeting house services. Yet their property continued to flourish in ways that defied the harsh Montana winter. The gardens remained green and productive despite temperatures that dropped well below zero. The sheep continued to graze on pastures that should have been buried under feet of snow. The meeting house glowed with a soft inner light that could be seen across the valley on moonless nights. More disturbing still were the changes that began to appear in other residents of Iron Creek. Children who had visited the sisters began to demonstrate abilities that their parents found both miraculous and terrifying. They could predict future events with accuracy, communicate without speaking, and perform calculations that challenged the schoolteacher's understanding of mathematics. Adults who had been skeptical began reporting dreams and visions that seemed to carry messages from the sisters. The community was being transformed, not through force or persuasion, but through some form of spiritual osmosis that Dr. Stirling could neither explain nor prevent. By the spring of 1892, Iron Creek had become a place of miracles and wonders that attracted pilgrims from across the territory. People came seeking healing, enlightenment, or simply a glimpse of the transformed sisters. But the sisters themselves remained secluded on their property, visible only as distant figures moving through their gardens or standing on the bluff before their meeting house. Their human qualities had receded almost completely, replaced by the luminous, silver-eyed beings they had become. Dr. Stirling continued to monitor the situation, but his medical training offered no framework for understanding what was happening. He watched as the community around him transformed, as ordinary men and women began to exhibit capabilities that should have been impossible, as the very nature of reality seemed to bend and shift in response to the sisters' influence. The final entry in Dr. Stirling's journal, dated June 21, 1892, revealed a man who had surrendered his scientific rationalism in the face of phenomena he could no longer deny. "I have witnessed things that should be impossible," he wrote. "I have documented physiological changes that defy every principle of medical science. I have observed human beings transforming into something beyond human. And I am forced to conclude that our current understanding of biology, of physics, of reality itself, is incomplete." The Harrowgate sisters were not sick. They were evolving. And they have begun a process that may ultimately transform us all. The Harrowgate homestead stands to this day, though the sisters themselves haven't been seen since the autumn of 1892. Their meeting house still glows on moonless nights, and their gardens continue to flourish through Montana's harshest winters. The official records remain sealed, classified by a medical establishment that couldn't explain what happened there. But the people of Iron Creek, now a ghost town slowly being reclaimed by the wilderness, know the truth. The transformation that began with 4 devout sisters continues, waiting for the right conditions to spread again. And if you visit that secluded valley on certain nights, when the moon is new and the wind carries a certain resonance, you might just hear the echo of 4 voices harmonizing in ways that human vocal cords should not be able to generate. You might feel the pull of that refining fire, calling you to become something more than human. The question is, would you answer?